Good morning. Color grading. Let's talk about it. We all know about color grading, but has anybody ever walked you through it step by step? I'll be here to do that. Don't worry. From the camera settings, shooting in log, camera exposure, and of course, post-production color correction and the color grading process. Not only that, but I did just drop my signature LUTs and also my own cinematic LUT pack that I've created these past few years. You can go ahead and grab them, clicking the link in the description below.
I'm a little bit too much for ya.
What's up, everybody? My name is Desiree LaCap, aka LaCapture. I'm a filmmaker who also shares educational film tips and tricks integrated with mental health tips and tricks all across social media. In this video, we'll be talking about color correction and color grading in hopes that you'll walk away feeling pretty confident about shooting in log so you could better understand how to color grade, even if and when you decide to use a creative LUT. We'll briefly be talking about camera settings and how to shoot in log, conversion LUT versus a creative LUT, and then we'll go into post-production and actually walk through the basics of color correcting and understanding the hues, the curves, shadows, contrast, and then lastly, how you could apply my own creative LUT onto your videos and adjusting it that way. First, camera settings. So any camera that you're using, usually like Canon, Sony, even DJI, your phone, has this setting called log. Before we get into that, let's talk about when shooting in camera, exposure refers to how much light you allow to hit your camera sensor. So it's controlled by these three key settings, right? Your aperture, which is your f-stop. This is how wide your lens opens to let light in, and also affecting the depth of field, aka how blurry it is in the background. Next is your shutter speed. This is how long the shutter stays open for, affecting your motion blur. So of course, standard cinema is 1/48 or 1/50, which is a 180 shutter rule. But for stylistic choices, it could be either or for whatever you're filming. Now we have the ISO, which is the sensor's sensitivity to light, with higher values introducing more noise in your footage and making sure that your exposure is pretty spot on. If you're shooting in log, right, and you have the capability to manually set your camera exposure settings, I would highly recommend to do so, because exposure becomes even more critical because the flat, low contrast image is designed to preserve maximum detail in shadows and highlights. Mistakes in exposure are harder to fix later without introducing like noise or losing the details in the shadows. Just make sure, even if you were to have like a very low f-stop, to balance it out with either popping on an ND filter if it's too bright, or to balance out the shutter speed and even the ISO. For example, a lot of cameras have second or third base ISO, and I would recommend to boost that up. When you enable log in camera, you're essentially switching to a special color profile that captures a wider dynamic range. Okay, this right here is an example of picture profile / the log being off in camera. You see how saturated the colors are? I wouldn't have any flexibility in color correcting it myself in post-production. Now let me show it off. Now this right here is with the log on in my camera, which is picture profile. You see the difference? Now this is with just the log feature. Now Rec 709 applied, which is just the conversion of bringing the log footage back into kind of bringing the colors back in, but with flexibility. Now with my LUT on applied. So it just gives more flexibility when color correcting and color grading in post-production. This profile prioritizes information over pretty colors, so your footage will look very washed out straight from the camera, but it will give you more flexibility in post-production when you're color grading. If your camera has a capability, here's some key things to set when shooting in log. Correct white balance. Sometimes if you're shooting in auto white balance, then some clips will turn out to be very cool and then some will turn out to be very warm. But in post-production, you're gonna have to adjust the temperature or the tint of the shadow, highlights, or the contrast. But it's just easier if you just keep your white balance consistent in camera. Next, your ISO settings. Make sure to follow the camera's native or base ISO for log to maintain the highest dynamic range. This almost means that the higher you try to boost your ISO, if there is no second or third base in your camera, the more noise you're gonna get in your clip. And it's almost not, it just doesn't look good, to be honest. Next, so picture profile. Select your camera specific log profile. For example, for Sony, it's like S-Log3, or you have V-Log in other cameras, or C-Log2 for Canon. Whatever camera you're using, if it has a capability, just select the log profile. Now, like what I was saying earlier, exposure tools. Try to use those exposure tools like the waveform or the zebras or even false color to nail your exposure, because even if you use that little diagram on the LCD screen of the camera, it could be reading something that's a little brighter in the background, but then say, for example, you as a subject is a lot more dimmer and dark. So using false color allows you to show like, oh, okay, well, this part right here of my face is darker. It needs to be exposed higher than it is in the background. So, and also, if your camera has a capability, bit depth and codec. So the higher bit depth, which is like 10 bit or higher, helps with smooth color grading. Let's talk about log on the like when you're shooting in log, and then when log in your camera is off. Log on, like log on like your email or something like that, you know? When your in-camera settings are on for log, it captures a flat, desaturated image that preserves details in both bright highlights and dark shadows. Are you following along? It's best for projects where you'll do very heavy color grading and want the most creative control when it comes to the overall look and feel of your image. This requires proper monitoring tools or LUTs to visualize the final look while filming. Something to note is that a lot of cameras allow LUT support, something like that, where you're able to actually download your specific LUTs onto your SD card and input it into your camera, but it's not baked in to the footage. It's just a preview of what it's gonna look like. Now, when your in-camera log settings are off, this captures footage with that baked in look, right? The contrast, saturation, and sharpening are already applied. It's easier to work with if you don't plan to grade extensively, but gives you less room to cover highlights or shadows. Like you see this image right here, side to side, this is log off and this is log on. Now with the log on, I've just applied the Rec 709 and then my LUT. So you could see how flexible color correction and grading were when having my log on setting. And then with log off, it just looks a little too oversaturated. The highlights are a little blown out. Like I just didn't, you know what I'm saying? I just don't prefer that because I already lost some details in the highlights low-key. Okay, y'all, it's time to talk about LUTs. Now that we understand shooting in log, the next step is to break down conversion LUTs versus creative LUTs. Two tools that often get confused but serve very different purposes in the color workflow. So if you never knew, LUT stands for lookup table. I don't know why. I remember hearing that and I'm like, why is it called lookup table? Like, well, in simple terms, as I've been taught, it's like a mathematical formula or whatever. I don't know, that side of my brain don't work. That tells your editing or color grading software, when you see this color value, change it to this other color value. That's the best I could explain it that I've learned, honestly. Basically, think of it as a translator between the footage you shot and the way you want it to look on screen. I know it could be a little confusing, but let's walk through it, okay? The conversion LUT takes your flat, desaturated log footage and transforms it into a standard color space, such as Rec 709. It restores natural contrast, saturation, and gamma, and this normalizes your footage so you're working with an image that looks accurate and viewable instead of flat and desaturated. Without it, log footage stays washed out and low contrast, making exposure and color adjustments difficult. So if you try to put a LUT that's been created without the Rec 709, then it's gonna be looking washed and you're gonna be like, what does this look like? So if that ever happens to you, just remember you have to convert that log footage first and then apply the creative LUT, because some LUTs require that first. Let's talk about the creative LUTs. Once the image is in a proper color space, creative LUTs are applied to stylize the footage, right? It gives it that certain look and feel. This is where the mood or the look is crafted. Anything from warm golden tones for nostalgia to cool shadows for a moody thriller. Whatever it is that you're going for, creative LUTs are about expression and not accuracy. So overall, what we just kind of broke down and talked about, this is my footage. This right here, this is the raw. This is as raw as it's gonna get. I'm shooting on the Canon EOS R5 Mark II in C-Log 2, and this is flat. This is log right here. Now, this is where I apply the conversion LUT, which is the Rec 709. Now, let's go side to side right now. So this is flat, and that over there is Rec 709. Then now let's apply my creative LUT, like the lacapture LUT that you could go ahead and grab down in the description below. But now let's tweak it a little bit. So I'm gonna probably add some shadows and contrast, because even then, nothing is a one-click wonder, okay? There's some adjustments that you have to do depending on the exposure of your setting or wherever you're filming at. So depending on your exposure, you would have to adjust shadows, highlights, etc. to your liking. Now on to post-production. I believe, like I mentioned earlier, it's not all about one-click wonder, right? It's understanding at least the basics of how your image is affected with what you're adjusting is important to having an accurate look and feel. I'm gonna walk you through some basics for color grading your footage, then how you could apply my LUT directly to yours. First, starting off with the basics. Generally, I create my LUTs using DaVinci, but in this video specifically, to understand actually the lumetri scopes or even the shadows, the tints, the highlights, the contrast, the curves, everything that we're about to walk through applies in DaVinci, Final Cut Pro, whatever it is that you're trying to color correct or color grade. It's just basic knowledge of understanding it. That way you know what to do when you're trying to color grade your own footage. Okay, let's go. Something that I filmed randomly. Also, something to note as well when I am filming, I'm pretty intentional with the colors that I wear and my environment. That really helps with letting the colors pop in the frame. We're going to talk about the basic color correction. So at least for this image right here, first what I want to do is apply an adjustment layer, or if you're color correcting or grading in DaVinci, I would add separate nodes for almost like, depending on how you organize your color correction or grading. For this one, I'm just going to directly apply my LUT, which you could get down in the description below. I'm just going to keep saying that, you know what I'm saying? But I put an adjustment layer because I don't like to apply it directly on the footage, just in case I want to see before and after or take away what I just did, like the highlights versus the shadows and contrast. Under the lumetri, you have basic, creative, curves, color wheels, and match HSL, secondary, vignette. I don't ever really use vignette, to be honest, but we're going to walk through these and you'll see how it impacts the image or the footage. But first, I'm going to go under creative and just apply my own lacapture LUT. So this right here has my lacapture LUT just applied, because I've already added the conversion LUT when I created this, and then I color graded it. This is how it usually is, but you could kind of tell that it needs more contrast and shadows. I'm just going to show you what each of them do and we're going to walk through it. Okay, so exposure affects the entire image. I rarely ever touch exposure. I never I never touch exposure. So let's look at the difference between contrast versus shadows, because a lot of people may think that they are doing the same thing, but it's not. So the contrast, it adjusts the differences between the brightest parts, which are the highlights, and the darkest parts, which are the shadows. Think of it like stretching or compressing the whole like tonal range. As for the shadows, it specifically just targets the darker areas of the image, not the highlights or the midtones. So you see how it darkened the entire image here? As for the contrast, when I increase it, the brights get brighter and the darks get darker. It makes the image feel more punchy and defined. When you decrease the contrast, everything moves closer to like a gray midtone, and the image feels flat or low contrast. Raising the highlights brightens those lighter areas but leaves the purest whites untouched, as you can see, right? So lowering them down recovers details from overexposure. Like, as you could kind of see, I mean, there's no clouds out there, but you kind of see the colors coming back from the sky. And then for the whites, when I'm raising it, it pushes the brightest parts towards pure white and this could actually clip it. Now when I'm lowering them, it brings those blown out or near white spots back into range. But then you can kind of see how a little bit washed out this image looks. But if you balance these two out, you could find that sweet spot. I'm just gonna go do this pretty quickly. In your curves, you also have your red curves, which impacts like the red tone. This right here is your mid tone, so it's gonna impact like the mid tones of your image. But down here is your shadows. So when you kind of decrease the shadow, then more greens come in and more blues. So just kind of understanding the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights of this. And once you start playing around with it, then you'll start to understand that if I'm dragging this over here on the left side, then it's increasing my highlights in the red tones, which I don't ever really do. It's kind of gross. For hue versus saturation, this one's pretty fun. And this is where I like to increase saturation more in certain colors. Let me just show you guys the hue versus saturation. What I like to do is say I want the blues to be a little more blue or different, then I'm gonna go ahead and grab this picker tool and I'll go here and it's gonna kind of already set the range for me, but you could also do it manually. But look how it changes the blues only. And then same if I wanted to do it with the red right here in my hat. So you gotta kind of find a middle balance because see how it's impacting my skin tones. But I love that. The hue, that's what hue versus saturation is. Now hue versus hue, and I want to change the blues, but this time it'll change the color. So the hue versus hue helps you change the color of the certain area you chose in your image. Now for hue versus luma, this is kind of different. It's very much like, I don't ever really use this because see how it impacts my image. I'm not really quite sure. But you also have to watch out for these parts right here in your image because you could also get some, what is it called, like banding or just that grainy noise. So for this part right here, there are three main color wheels, okay? So we have the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. The shadows, of course, moves the darkest part of your image. If I'm gonna drag it towards the blue, the shadows look cooler and moodier. Or if I drag it towards orange, it looks more warm and like cinematic, right? But it sets the base tone, which is like the mood of your scene, and the dark areas hold the atmosphere. Now the mid-tones, which are the gamma, it affects the middle range, right? It's your skin, the objects, which is like most of the frame. So for example, if I push it towards the teal, the skin looks kind of like almost sickly, and then I push it towards the orange and skin looks more warm and lively. Basically, it shapes how your subject and main story feels, and this is where the eye usually focuses on. Now your highlights wheel, it controls the brightest areas of your image. So for example, you grab it towards the orange, areas of this look golden, and you drag it towards the blue, and then windows, well I changed that part, but you see how my shirt and my skin tone and stuff like that. The impact is it defines the energy and the brightness of the scene, and it sets kind of the time of day vibe, you know. So overall, generally the shadows equals foundation, which is mood and weight. The midtones equals body, which is skin and life and realism. And then the highlights is like sparkle. It's that energy / polish. So you always kind of want to balance it out. Right now, for me, it's looking a little red. So when it's red, I'll kind of go the opposite direction of where I want it to go. So I'll go more on the cooler side, dragging that down to eliminate some of that red. Look, I know I'm walking through it really fast, but I just wanted you guys to have a basic understanding of how to color correct and or color grade your own images. And now let's talk about steps to actually using the LaCapture LUT. So a lot of you guys, and I thank you so much and I appreciate the support, have purchased the LaCapture LUT, which is down in the description below. I'm gonna show y'all. Let me show y'all. I'm so proud of myself, y'all. This is a lot. So as you guys know, I have dropped LaCapture's cinematic LUT bundle or even the LaCapture LUT. Okay, this is the LaCapture LUT right here, from log to the LaCapture LUT. And again, it's not a one-click wonder. You got to do some adjustments, so I'm here to show you how to do that. Once you've purchased your LUT, you're going to get this file, a .cube file. Now I'm here to show you how to do it. And this applies to anything. If you were using DaVinci, you could do this as well, to adding it onto a node and then just adding additional nodes to make your adjustments based on your exposure settings. So I'm going to add my adjustment layer over, but I just suggest not putting it directly on your clip. Then you're gonna go into creative, look, and then you're gonna browse and then just find that file, which is a .cube file. So once you have that, that's what the file is going to be, and that's how you apply it. You can't just directly click into it and it's going to give you something. You have to apply it to an adjustment layer or a footage. So I'm going to go ahead and open that, and you can see it directly applied it already. From there, as you could tell, it does need some contrast here, and that's kind of how I had it because it also depends on exposure. I've always known that I could add like shadows and contrast and increase the contrast, then take away contrast. So from there, I'm gonna go into curves, and I kind of just play around with that. So down here is the shadows. I'm just gonna increase that a little bit. As you can see, it's impacting the dark areas. I'm gonna increase the contrast, and increasing the contrast makes the dark areas darker and the bright areas brighter. So I kind of want that good balance there. So I'll do that first, and then I'll go into my shadows and my highlights. Kind of want that blue in the sky over there, so I'm gonna go ahead and decrease my highlights and then pick my shadows back up just a little bit and then take some contrast away. And then I'll go into the curves and maybe pick up my midtones. So I'll go so it's a little brighter. So that's kind of what it is. Honestly, it's pretty simple, you know, but just remember to mess around with it as you please. And then you could even go to the color wheels and make it even more warmer than you want to, or less warmer and more cooler here. And then I'll go into my hue versus hue. Maybe change this color of the skies here. I think that's unrealistic though. So I'm gonna just go hue versus saturation and just increase the blues a little bit. And then potentially see what increasing the greens look like. So just playing around with the image, but I gave you kind of the blueprint. It's just your job to now like build the house and then finesse it to your liking. Okay, so you don't need to be a colorist to make your footage pop, right? You just need the right tools and the right understanding of how to color grade your footage. And I made these LaCapture LUTs specifically for that. So whether you're on a Sony, Canon, DJI, or even a phone, if your footage is in log, these LUTs could give you a head start. And here's the thing, LUTs save time and you don't have to start from scratch every time you color. They help you find a consistent look, a vibe that could eventually lead to your own signature look. No LUT is a one-click fix for bad exposure though. So remember what we talked about earlier when it comes to camera settings and exposure. If you shot in the dark, no LUT's gonna save that. But if your footage is exposed right, then you'll create magic. Expose right, white balance, focus, then use the LUT. Y'all, the way I'm talking hella fast because the camera is dying right now, but take what resonates, leave what doesn't. But I appreciate you so much for supporting, for being here, for learning, for pouring into you. And remember, keep being great. Go out and create and have fun doing it. I'll see y'all at the next video. Peace. Oh, we did it, y'all. Y'all like my shirt? It says art department. But I'm not art department. I'm DP department, you know? Okay, well, see y'all.